privilege to get to introduce our speaker today, Henry Adaso, the AVP of Marketing and Communications at the United Way of Greater Houston. Fueled by coffee and hip hop, Henry Adaso is a marketing leader with 2 decades of elbow grease. A former music journalist, he is a natural storyteller and an innovative marketer. As AVP of Marketing and Communications at United Way of Greater Houston, Henry leads the nonprofit's efforts to amplify its work across the Greater Houston region. Passionate about the transformative power of marketing and mentorship, Henry is a certified mentor with the Global Mentorship Initiative, a founding member of the African American Marketing Association, and current president-elect of the American Marketing Association's Houston chapter. In 2024, Henry was named one of top 50 Black marketers to watch by the African American Marketing Association. Henry is the author of 3 Amazon best-selling books, Content Mapping, The Gap, and his newest one, The Art of Messaging. And on top of all of this, if that wasn't enough, Henry was blessed with a new baby boy back in October, and somehow he found the time amidst all that parenting to still come and share with us today. So thank you for that, Henry, and I'm going to kick it off to you.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Our baby boy is such a blessing. You may hear him in the background. If you do, this is why we're just so blessed to have him. I'm so glad to be here with you today, and we're going to talk about how to create remarkable messaging for your brand. Now, if you're like me, you've probably visited a website or two, and after a few minutes of browsing, you ask yourself, well, what exactly do they do again? And if you're like me, you've probably received an email or two that you deleted without even reading it. Things used to be a lot simpler. It used to be that as a business to get attention, all you had to do was create a great brochure or a 3-panel flyer and mail it out to people and ask them to request information. And they did because businesses had all the information. And now the customer has all the information. It used to be that as a nonprofit, to generate traction, you had to tell a compelling story, sprinkle in some sad photos, and set it to some Enya music, and the dollars would roll right in. It's not that simple anymore. In this world that we live in, this world of 24/7 news cycle, this world of dance videos and doom scrolling and donor fatigue, even the most compelling causes are finding it difficult to resonate. Here's the reality. The reality is that we are now living in what I believe to be the noisiest marketing environment of any generation. So in this noisy world of ours, here's the reality. There are 37,000 nonprofit organizations in the greater Houston area alone. And as Roberta mentioned, the average American sees nearly 4,000 messages every single day. In a world where your perfectly crafted email is one of 330 billion with a B that's sent globally every single day, and that number is only going to grow. How do you resonate? The good news is that your message can absolutely break through the noise. And we're going to talk about how to do that today. Now, it's tempting to think that if we simply do good work, if we build a great cause or create a great product, that people will support us, that the cream rises to the top, that if we build it, they will come. But what every single one of you has already figured out is that the reality is often different. And the reality is that we have to tell people about that great work that we do. It's kind of like if you bake the most delicious chocolate cake in your neighborhood and that people will smell it and come. But in reality, you have to go tell them that you have the best chocolate cake in the neighborhood. And how we do this matters. We have to be intentional in our communication. And I believe that the key is that we have to use remarkable messaging. Now, we've all encountered remarkable messaging. It's the kind of message that you remember. It's the kind that moves you to action, the kind it's memorable. There's no reason why your messaging can't be like that. So I'm going to give you 5 tips that you can use. You don't have to master all 5 of them. You just have to pick one, and you'll already be on your way to creating remarkable messaging. Rule number 1, spark curiosity. Now, when we first encounter people who are interested in what we have to offer, it's tempting to want to tell them about all the things that we do, but that's overwhelming. Think about a grocery store. If you go to a grocery store and you saw all of the inventory lined up at the front of the store, wouldn't that be overwhelming? But what grocery stores do is they select a few items that they want you to pay attention to, and those are the ones that they put at the front of the store. We have to think about our brand in the same way. What is that item that we want to put at the front of the store? What do we want to communicate to somebody today that gets them go, tell me more about that? This is what it means to spark curiosity. Tell them what they need to know today, not tomorrow, not 3 months from now. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how exactly do I do that? I'm going to give you three curiosity sparkers that I like to use. Curiosity sparker number one is to share an intriguing fact. At United Way, one of the intriguing facts that we share is that 13% of households across Greater Houston are living on incomes below the federal poverty level. Another 31% are working extremely hard, sometimes two or three jobs, and are still struggling to make ends meet. And that's not okay. And that's why we unite partners and donors and volunteers to help our neighbors land on their feet and stay there. Now, I gave you the whole value proposition, but I began with an intriguing fact. I didn't tell you about all of our programs and services, from healthcare to early childhood. I didn't tell you about our nonprofit connection that helps strengthen the nonprofit sector, the bedrock of our community. I could tell you about our project blueprint that prepares people of color for board leadership positions, and on and on and on. But you begin by sharing an intriguing fact in service of the audience, and then you want to nurture that conversation and follow up with them with more details. Another way to spark curiosity is to use pattern interruption. Our brain is wired to recognize things that are different, to remember things that are unusual, things that break a pattern. Like this brilliant Bucky's billboard. This billboard starts off one way. It starts off being informative. Only 262 miles to Bucky's. And what do you expect to happen next? You expect it to provide additional information. Maybe it tells you where to exit, but instead it takes a left turn and it breaks the pattern and introduces humor. You can hold it. That's what makes it so memorable. You're probably saying, I don't have Bucky's billboard budget. And I'm here to tell you that you don't need Bucky's billboard budget to be able to break patterns. You can do this in your email. You can do this through social media. You can do this by using direct mail. I've seen some direct mail campaigns that include a video. So you open the letter and you expect to see words, but instead a video starts playing about a product or organization. You're going to remember who sends you that direct mail. So you can do this in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Another way to spark curiosity is to ask a thought-provoking question. The power of a thought-provoking question is that it gets the other person engaged and it gets them thinking about the potential answers to that question, and that builds more recall. To give you an example, many years ago, I went to a farmer's market and I stopped by a soap vendor. And the soap vendor asked me, would you wash your body with detergent? And I said, absolutely not. Now, that question stopped me in my tracks. And she said, well, every time you buy a body wash, you're practically buying detergent. The reason I'm telling you this story today is because I remember that vendor because the vendor asked me a thought-provoking question. So in your business, in your nonprofit, what are some thought-provoking questions that you can use to begin your messaging? If you're someone who is working to end poverty, what if you said to your donors, what if everything we knew about fighting poverty is wrong? Now that gets them thinking, that gets them in the game. So think about ways to get your audience engaged by asking a thought-provoking question. Rule number two of remarkable messaging, be specific. Be crystal clear about what's on offer, who you're seeking to reach, and why it matters. For example, in my line of work as a nonprofit professional, if I were to say to you that we help children, you're not likely to remember that message 2 months from now. But if I said to you, we provide STEM education to underserved to middle school children in underserved communities in Greater Houston, helping them increase their math scores and build their confidence. Now, that's much more specific and much more memorable. If I say to you that we help seniors, you're not likely to remember it. But if I were to say we provide hot meals to 250 homebound seniors every week, that's much more specific and that's much more memorable. The point here is that the more specific your messaging, the more memorable it is. Now, this isn't just Henry Adaso's opinion. This is backed by neuroscience. This is due to what's known as the dual coding theory. So neuroscientists tell us that when we encounter language that's concrete, language that's specific, that we have two ways of processing that language. One is verbal association, meaning we recognize the word and so we encode it in our memory. The other is visual association, meaning that we can visualize that word and we also encode it in our memory, which helps make it more memorable. But when we encounter language that's vague, that's abstract, we only have a single pathway for encoding it, and that's verbal. To give you an example, if I say the word cupcake, you recognize the word and you can visualize the word. That's dual pathways. But if I were to say the word idea, because there's no set image of what an idea looks like, it's less memorable and you only have that verbal association, that single pathway. So, what is the cupcake in your messaging? How can you lean into that more? How can you share more cupcakes when you're talking about the work that you do? This is the key to being remarkable. Rule number, last stat I want to share for those of us that work in the impact sector, those nonprofit organizations. You're gonna love this. Campaign Monitor says that 74% of donors are more likely to increase their donation amount and or give outside of their regular cadence if there is a compelling request to meet a what? Specific need. This is the power of specificity. It also helps inspire action. Okay, we're gonna go to rule number 3, highlight the transformation. The transformation is a powerful why behind what you do. Now, if you only take one thing away from this session today, it's this one. And I'm going to tell you why. Many years ago, I used to work for a marketing agency, and I would encounter brands that were looking to improve their messaging across multiple industries. And so I began to study messaging of prominent brands. And now I could instinctively write the messaging that got the job done based on my training, but I wanted to codify this approach for others and be able to teach it to my team and to those brands as well. So, based on what I learned from hours of study and research, I created a messaging framework that I call the Messaging Tower. And it helps harness the most compelling qualities of any brand. Here's how it works. Imagine a tower with 3 tiers. At the base of the tier, you have your features. The features are your descriptive elements. They're more technical in nature. This is the foundation of what you do. So if you're in nonprofit, features are going to be your programs and your services. If you're in business, it may be your products and the descriptive components of those products. The headphone that I'm wearing, the color of the headphone, the weight of the headphone, the production and sound quality. Those are all features. Here's the thing about features. They only appeal to 20% of your audience. And most marketing, it focuses their messaging on the features. As we move up one level, we see benefits. Benefits answer the question, how is it beneficial? What can it do for me? If I have a pair of headphones that are light and have great quality, maybe they make it easier for me to enjoy my music. That's a benefit. Benefits are great and they're compelling and they're better than features and they appeal to more people, but that's not the top of the tower. The very top of the tower is the golden ticket. And this is what I call the transformation. The transformation answers the question, why does it matter? How will this be different tomorrow? How will this change my situation if I were to sign up? And here's the powerful truth that changed everything for me when I did this work. People don't buy features and benefits, they buy a transformation. Think about it. We don't buy gym memberships strictly for access to gym equipment. We buy a fitness transformation. We don't book hotel rooms just for the views or the large rooms, although those are great. What we're really booking is a blissful getaway, an adventure, a story we can tell about our excursions. And we don't support organizations strictly for the programs and services that they offer, although those are great. What we're giving is to the promise of change, the vision of what could be, and how this could be different tomorrow. Now, the transformation can be internal in the audience that you're seeking, or it could be external. It could be the change that they want to see in themselves, meaning how they want to feel after they go through this experience or buy this product or support this organization. Or it could be the change that they want to see in the world. It could be external, how they want others to feel. But either way, transformation is the key to inspiring action through your messaging. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Because after I built this framework, I saw transformation everywhere I looked. Apple, think differently. That's a transformation. Walmart, save money, live better. That's a transformation. Beats by Dre headphones, hear music the way your favorite artist does. That is a transformation. And in the nonprofit world, here are some examples. St. Jude's, help today's patients become tomorrow's survivors. Do you see the transformation? Charity Water, help bring clean and safe water to every person on the planet. That's a transformation. Habitat, a world where everyone has a decent place to live. That is a transformation. So, what I want to challenge you to do is to think about harnessing and highlighting the transformation that's already inherent in the work that you do. Rule number 4, be consistent. So, you've done all the hard work of clarifying your messaging and harnessing the transformation. And now you need to make sure that all of your messengers are singing from the same hymn book, that they're being consistent across touch points because consistency builds credibility. Imagine if Apple sometimes said, think differently, and other times they said, think complicated. Imagine if Nike sometimes said, just do it, and other times they said, come on, do it. We would all be confused. We would wonder what the heck's going on at those companies. But the best brands in the world are clear, they're consistent about what they stand for, and they're cohesive in their approach. So much so that their supporters can almost predict the future. So think about Apple, for example. Apple is so consistent that if Apple were to go into the gas station business, we can all predict what an Apple gas station might look like. We've never seen one. If Apple became a home builder, we could predict with very good accuracy what an Apple home might look like. You've never seen one. How come? Because Apple is very clear and consistent across their touch points. So here's a question for you. If your business went into a different line of work, if you introduce a new product or you enter the new space, can your supporters predict how you might show up? That's when you know that you're being consistent. Now, consistency is all about creating a source of cohesion for the people that speak on behalf of your brand or your organization. And this doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as compiling all of your key messages and your value proposition in a single source that people can access. It could be a Word document that's available to all of your messengers. Rule number 5, last but not least, choose the right message for the right channel. Messaging acts and behaves differently depending on the channel. And I want to give you some best practices that you can follow. So if you're crafting a message for a billboard, remember that you're messaging to a transient audience, their emotion, and sometimes they may be on their phone or trying to avoid that car that just cut them off. So your goal is to win attention in 3 seconds or less. And your billboards need to be bold and legible. I've seen some billboards that are upside down, and then you see people trying to read the billboard and figure out what it says. At that point, it becomes a safety hazard, and people are just going to give up. So think headline, not novel. If your messaging is through an email, this is a great place to test your messaging in the subject line. So use a compelling subject line and simulate conversation because email is a direct marketing channel and it should feel like you're talking to that person one on one. Have you ever received an email that addressed you as, hey, everyone, or hey, y'all? I always think that the sender imagines all of us gathered around a campfire just reading the email together. But that's not how we read emails. We read it individually. And the tone of your email should reflect this. Also, great place to include a strong call to action. Test those calls to action and see which ones are driving clicks. If your messaging is being adapted for social media, you have to remember that social media is like a speeding bullet train and there's so much happening and so much information, and your goal is to stop the scroll. So you have to be bold and you have to be engaging right off the bat. It's also a great place to test different formats. Try a video, try using a static image, try reels, and see what works for your brand and your organization. If it's for a website, this is a self-serve audience. They're coming in to get all the information they need before they talk to anyone. So your goal is to anticipate their needs and answer their questions before those questions come up. It's also a great place to include that bold and clear messaging on your homepage so people know exactly what you stand for and how to support you. Now, I threw in a bonus tip because I'm feeling generous today, and it's this: always be testing. You may try some of these ideas and find that some work better than others. Test them and find out what works for you, and then do more of that. So, if you're, for example, thinking about two different messages, email is a great place to run an A/B test. One of the things I like to do is to break out two headlines. You send one headline to 50% of your email list, and then you send the other to the other 50%, and then you test and see which headline is winning. And the one that wins, that's what you send to the rest of your list. And so always be testing and adapt your messaging as you learn new things. Messaging always evolves. And so the message that you begin with is not always the one that you end up with. You have to co-create it with your audience, listen to your audience, and adapt. I've been in marketing for almost 20 years, and one thing I know for sure is that no one knows anything for sure. The market will tell you. Now, you may test something and it works, and then it doesn't. It works until it doesn't. That's because people change and forget to tell each other, according to Lillian Hellman. So the messaging that worked 5 years ago might not work today. At United Way, we used to have a lot of fight words in our messaging many, many years ago. And then people changed and forgot to tell us. And so we adapted. So always test and listen, and then you repeat the cycle. Now, everything we've talked about comes down to this: remarkable messaging. And I want you to picture someone who has just encountered your brand for the first time. So maybe they saw a social media post, or they saw an email or a billboard. In that moment, they have two choices. They can either continue what they were doing before they encountered your brand, or they can lean in and learn more about what you do. And I think what will lead to them leaning in to learn more about what you do is, are you creating remarkable messaging? And in my opinion, remarkable messaging is bold, it's empathic, it's specific, and it's transformative. And yes, that is an acronym that spells out BEST. I work in nonprofit. What can I say? I make acronyms. And so if you're wondering, am I creating remarkable messaging? Come back to this framework. Is it bold? Is it empathic? Is it specific? And is it transformative? As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to master all of these tips. You now have five of them in your toolkit to help you lean in. But if you pick one and focus on it, I promise you that your messaging will be on its way to being remarkable. And so with that, I will invite Roberta back on, but before she comes on, just reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about anything that we talked about. I know I went through it very, very fast. There's a lot to cover. I talk more about some of these concepts in my book, The Art of Messaging. All the principles are in there. And I spend way too much time on LinkedIn. So stalk me there, send me your questions or your messaging if you want me to look at them. And then if you want to learn more, check out the book. It's on Amazon. And with that, I will invite Roberta for the Q&A. Back to you, Roberta.
All right. Wow. What an information, just not overload. It was very clear. It was a lot, but that was incredible, Henry. I always learn so much from you every time I hear you present. So thank you for that. We are going to wrap up the content part in just a couple minutes, but we promised you live Q&A. So while you are thinking through your questions, type those in the little Q&A button at the bottom. This is your chance to get your questions answered from Henry himself directly. Wealth of information. So utilize it. You can ask a specific question for your organization. Please type your questions in there also. If you would like help crafting your messaging, two things. Number one, I will send everyone a value proposition worksheet. When Henry did this presentation at the Power Tools conference, we had time to practice and put in, actually form some concrete statements with that transformative message that he talked about was so big, the transformation. This is a huge hit. So as your thank you for attending our session, I will send that out so you can have that for your organization. And also, if you would like help building out your messaging for your organization as a whole, your business or nonprofit, or maybe one of your programs, please reach out to us. Our certified story brand guides would love to help you, and they're just very, very talented people. So if you'll go back to the feedback slide. Yes. So one more thing before we get questions going is feedback. If you will take 2 minutes, please scan the QR code. Carrie is also posting it in the chat for the survey. If you'll take 2 minutes to answer just a really quick survey about our webinars. If this is your first time, we do these every month, and it's a different topic every month on how you can grow your brand and make a better impact, bigger impact. So please take 2 minutes to give us some helpful feedback on content that we can do in the future for our webinars. So let's get to some questions. Remember to type them in the Q&A if you have more. Right now, I had a couple that came through. Henry, our first question is, can you define the difference between clear and remarkable messaging?
Absolutely. So they're kind of related, right? So for your messaging to be remarkable, it also has to be clear. But there's a difference between what most people think of as clear and compelling and what I think of as remarkable. So clear messaging, it tells you what's on offer, who it's for. That's clear. For it to be remarkable, it also has to tell you why. And so the why part is often the difference between remarkability and other types of messaging. So we have to ask ourselves, are we being clear? Are we being specific? And are we highlighting the why? Why does this matter? Why should I care? I've seen a message from an airline that said, be first in line. That's a powerful, remarkable message because it's telling you why you should book that airline. And to me, that's often the difference. So if you're wondering, am I being clear versus being remarkable? Ask yourself, where's the why in this messaging?
That's really good. The why drives us, right? And without the why, then yeah, because the why kicks in when things get hard or when they get difficult or different. So that's really good. Thank you for that. All right, Henry, our next question is, could you share a case study of messaging transformation using your principles? I know you have a lot of experience, maybe one that comes to the top of your head.
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to work for a company that sold material handling equipment, and we were launching a campaign. And so we were doing our due diligence, trying to build our buyer personas, understand the audience. And what we noticed was that a lot of what the competition was doing was talking about the qualities of the product. We had a product in the industry at the time that was an electric product and came with so many benefits. It saved time for people, and it did the work in half the time essentially. And we found in our research that there were different things that appealed to different audiences. And all of those elements that appeal to them at the highest emotional level were all related to the transformative outcome of that product. And we found that this was different for every persona. So what we ended up doing, and this was a very successful campaign that helped increase sales of that product, was that if we're talking to the procurement manager, we focused on the transformation, which is we're going to help you save money without compromising quality because we know that that's how their job gets measured. Is am I saving the company money and am I also maintaining our quality and standards? We went to the operations manager and we said, hey, this is going to maximize safety for your people. That was us leaning into the why. We've not talked about the product at this point. We're starting with the why, with the transformation, and then we're going down the list and saying, oh, and it does all these other things, right? And so that was to me just kind of an illuminating case study on the power of transformation and the power of adapting that transformation to different audiences because different people respond to different transformative outcomes.
Wow, that is really good. And I like how you talked about clarifying it for each different audience, but still keeping the overall cohesive message. Because I think sometimes we tend to go to one or the other, where we say the same thing to everybody and it's not resonating with those personas, or we are changing it up so much that now it's confusing because they're hearing a message one way here and they see your billboard or your social media ad here. And now we have message identity crisis, and then we're not hitting people there. So having that overall messaging and building out those personas, and it's so cool to hear it work. So thank you for sharing that. That's
We just one last thing on that, Roberta. We would
yeah,
never sell a hamburger to a vegetarian, right? That's so why would we do that without messaging? And so we have to tailor the message to each person. And some people, everything isn't for everyone. So for some people it may resonate, and for others it won't. But we have to adapt it to the transformation to the different audiences that we seek to serve.
very true. And that leads me to our next question, actually. What content formats generate the highest levels of engagement in the nonprofit sector? Because that's very different than, the business sector.
We see a lot of success with email. It varies from cause to cause and from audience to audience because believe it or not, even within the nonprofit sector, we have different audiences. So you have your volunteers, you have your donors, corporate partners, but where we consistently see the highest levels of engagement is email marketing.
It does still work, even though our inbox is bombarded, email marketing still works.
And think about it, right? Why does email still work? There's only one email. We don't have a substitute for email. There's only email, right? So even though you may have 1,000 messages, but you still got to go into your inbox
Yeah,
and
you
and
are.
and you right versus how many different social media platforms are there now? And that
Yeah.
fragments the audience, but there's only one email.
That's true. And even the social media, a lot of them get notifications sent to their inbox, right? But then when you log
Exactly.
into your email, you have to make sure that that message stands out, or they're just going to, because they get so many, delete it. So there is one email, but there's a lot of emails that come through to that. So that's yeah, really good. Um, on the topic of social media, how do you measure the success of your social media marketing efforts?
We look at engagement first and foremost. So that's the most important metric for us is how are we engaging the people that are already following us? Of course, we'd love to have a huge following, but the number one measure of success for us is engagement. And so we're looking at those shares, we're looking at those reposts, we're looking at those comments, and ultimately we're looking at how are we doing in terms of engagement. And here's the thing that most people may not realize about social media. There is a difference between active engagement and passive engagement. So passive engagement is somebody likes what you shared, and the way you'll know the difference is what takes the most amount of effort. Is it liking a post or is it typing out a thoughtful comment on the post? Or is it reposting without a comment or is it reposting with some thoughts? And so if you think about it in those terms, you start to recognize that what a lot of the social media platforms prioritize is active engagement because what is their number one goal? Platform retention. So if you agree that that's what they're prioritizing, then you're going to make it a priority to try to generate active engagement. So that means you don't want people simply liking your post. You want them also having a conversation there because that helps build active engagement. You want them reposting, and you also want them reposting with some thoughts. You want them posting directly to their platform with your content, and that builds active engagement. So I would really encourage you to look at ways to generate and build active engagement within your social media platforms.
Very, very helpful, especially with our generations, our younger ones. I don't remember what they're all called now coming up, right? Active engagement is key. So we've talked about email, we've talked about social media. Let me ask you this. Does print still work for campaigns?
Every year someone declares something dead, right? Like there's a new marketing channel that someone is like, oh, it's the demise of the billboard. Print is still very much alive. Nothing ever really dies in marketing. I'll tell you this, I've just from the past 2 decades of being in the game, I've seen so many things come back. Vinyl is popular again. Who knew? Nothing ever really dies. What people miss is the way it's about how you're using that platform. And
Mm.
so print is still very much effective. You know, in my past life, when I worked on the other side of the ledger, we had a lot of strong engagement and generate a lot of good feedback by using print, by sending out newsletters that we printed and mailed to people every year. So it's about how you're unlocking the value of that platform. And print, I see in our industry and in many industries, is still very much alive.
I agree. So I'm glad to hear that you have found the same thing in your research. So, would you share with us some common mistakes that companies and nonprofits make in their content marketing efforts? I think you shared a little bit in your presentation, but something else that you didn't bring up, maybe a case study that you've seen, maybe one that you've done yourself that just didn't go right.
Yeah, I've made a lot of mistakes. That's, part of how you learn. But what I see as the most common mistake in terms of content marketing specifically is that, and especially we're talking about messaging today, especially when it comes to messaging, is that well, I'll share two. One is we assume that we are our customer. So we put ourselves in their shoes and we say, well, what would we like to see? And what we have to do is put on the customer's hat and put on our empathy hat and ask what would they like to see. The second mistake is that we lead with the features. So I talked about the messaging tower and how there are features, benefits, and transformation. We often lead with the features because they are the low-hanging fruit, to use a cliche. They're the things that we are most familiar with because we're in the trenches doing the work. And so there's that proximity, and it's tempting to lead with what we know. So it turns out that's the least interesting thing you can say, and it appeals to 20%. So you lose 80% of the audience. And so I would encourage people to think about, how do I listen to the market? What do they respond to? What's important to them, right? Putting yourself in their shoes. And then secondly, how do I go beyond the features so that I make sure that I'm being inclusive in my messaging in terms of appealing to those 80% that are more responsive to benefits and transformation.
That's really good. And that goes back to the why that you said earlier, right? I mean, that all comes back to the why. They have a problem, right? Where they see a problem, there's something, you talked about the intriguing fact to highlight that problem and bringing it back to that. That's really helpful. All right. I think we've got time for one final question. If so, we always want to be authentic in our messaging, and we also have goals. How can you balance authentic messaging with strategic communication goals?
You always have to go back to your values. What are your mission and vision? What matters to your organization? What are you really trying to accomplish? And to me, that's the beginning. So the messaging is not the beginning, is what's this product? What's this organization? What are we really trying to accomplish? And how do I get that across in my messaging? And so if your goal is to serve the youth or to serve in the education space, then your messaging should reflect that. If your goal is to promote a product that's good for our health, then your messaging should promote that. So you have to lead with, what's the mission and what am I trying to accomplish? Messaging is not something that lives in a silo. It's part of the cohesive components of your marketing. So it should be supportive of your marketing strategy and not something fancy and shiny that you dangle as a way to gain attention. So always lead with, what are we really trying to accomplish here? Who are we really trying to go after? And what are the things that matter to them? And then how can my messaging play a role in driving that conversation forward?
So helpful. I think we either haven't built our messaging guide that we need to for nonprofits and organizations sometimes, or we built it and nobody's looked at it, or it's really old. And as times are changing and will continue to change faster than ever now. I like that you said it doesn't live in a silo and it needs to constantly be evaluated and tested. I love that, always be testing because things are always changing. So super
And,
helpful.
and just to add to that, Roberta, part of the challenge is people get bored with their messaging, especially in nonprofit, because you hear it all the time, and you're like, oh, then it just becomes white noise. It becomes audio wallpaper, right? And what we're learning is that there's always someone who's hearing it for the first time.
Mm.
And so even though we may get bored with it, someone may be hearing it for the first time, and that may make a difference to that person. And so I'll tell you this. I remember I was in a meeting once at United Way, and somebody said our core message, which is that we help our neighbors land on their feet and stay there. Now I've heard it many, many times, but there was somebody in that room who raised their hand and said, "Wow, that really resonated with me." They'd never heard it before, and it made a difference. And this person said, "You know what? I'm gonna start using this in my messaging." This is someone who helps campaign on our behalf, and said, "You know, I'm gonna start using this." And so it made a difference to that person. They heard it for the first time. So we get bored with our messaging, but remember that someone's always hearing it for the first time, and be consistent.
That's really good. And the consistency is good too, because people might have heard it, but they haven't paid attention. And then that one time they are, right? I've also heard it say marketing is memorization. And so by them hearing it over and over, then that one time they do hear it, right? Like that time you drive by that billboard that you first noticed, or that building that went up, that's actually been there a long time. And so it is important to keep the consistent message. And I like to use that too, especially for nonprofits. Storytelling is very, very impactful. So how do we take that key message, right? And the stories that we tell, because that's how we keep people engaged, our donors and supporters, by telling stories, these impact stories, but always bringing back our key message of the why and why they're making a difference.
Think about all the jingles that we remember that are just logged in our memory. Ba-dum-bum-bum-ba. Marketing wisdom suggests that it takes 7 to 15 brand impressions to build recall. So it doesn't hurt to repeat yourself. It's okay to be repetitive.
It is. Yeah. So helpful. Thank you so much, Henry. Really appreciate your time and all your knowledge. Again, if you have not followed Henry on LinkedIn, go and do that. Go buy his book. You'll get more of the content that he shared today. Connect with us as well if you'd like help with your messaging. And I will send out, I think somebody had asked, I'm going to send out our value proposition worksheet and a recording of this webinar. Please share it with anybody else that you think would find it helpful. Appreciate everyone's time today. And y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.